you can have the best evidence base to support your policy recommendation in the world, but if it doesn't have the support and the backing of those who are actually going to be delivering it, it's very unlikely to get traction and it's very unlikely to be successful. I think some of my proudest achievements are actually more about where we've achieved a change in perspective, because that has a very enduring impact.
Hello there, I'm Sarah McCluskey, and this is Research Adjacent. Each episode, I talk to amazing research-adjacent professionals about what they do and why it makes a difference. Keep listening to find out why we think the research-adjacent space is where the real magic happens. Hello and a warm welcome to Research Adjacent from me, your host, Sarah McCluskey. Although I really hope you've enjoyed the last 4 topic-based episodes, today we return to the classic career stories podcast format. And my guest, Rosalind Gill, has a job role that has been on my wish list for quite a while. That's because Rosalind works in policy. She is currently Head of Policy and Engagement at the National Centre for Universities and Businesses, also known as NCUB. As the name suggests, NCUB is all about connecting universities and businesses with government. Rosalind's role brings people together to create evidence-based recommendations which align with government priorities. Rosalind is unusual among my guests in that her career has been quite straightforward. Since her school days in the Netherlands, she has wanted to do work which gave her opportunities to influence public policy, and she has done exactly that with various roles working both in and on behalf of universities. In our conversation, we talk about bringing people together to respond to big sector challenges, the realities of working in the sometimes volatile political realm, the huge contribution that universities make to the UK economy, and why changing how people think often has more impact than any individual policy. Listen on to hear Rosalind's story. Welcome along to the podcast, Rosalind. Lovely to have you here. I wonder if we could begin our conversation by hearing a bit about what it is that you do.
Of course, and thank you very much for the invite, Sarah. So I work for the National Centre for Universities and Business, which is an organisation that is focused on improving the conditions for universities and businesses to work together to drive positive change through research, which of course is relevant to this podcast, but also through more broadly kind of skills and talent and other forms of collaboration around sort of local regeneration and those sorts of areas too. So my role in particular is responsible for all areas of policy, research and evidence, but also I work on engagements, which is really important for actually driving impact through some of the research that we do. So the engagement might be with universities and businesses to understand what sorts of barriers they're experiencing to their collaboration, what their biggest challenges might be, or the biggest opportunities that they see on the horizon. But importantly, engagement can also mean engagement with politicians to ensure that the proposals that we make are brought into reality, or engagement that's around telling the story of how important research, innovation, and all the wider activities that universities and businesses do together, how they really matter. So that's a bit about NCUB and a bit about my role within it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. And I mean, that's quite a big role you say there, but NCUB is quite a small organisation, isn't it?
Yeah, we're about 20 people, but that's our core. That's the centre. But the way that we're able to work across quite a strong breadth is because we work in partnership with a lot of others. So in the research and the policy work that we do, we actually often work in partnership with academics, sometimes with consultancies as well. So that's quite an important part of our model. But also we would view the universities and businesses that we work with as part of our extended network. They provide the insights and the knowledge that are essential for us to develop recommendations to government that are practical and will actually make a positive difference. So we are quite small in terms of our core, but I'd say that we're bigger in terms of the wider network that we operate in.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about that network that you use that term engagement. And I think a lot of people listening to this podcast will probably think of the term engagement as meaning around like public engagement and, you know, public involvement in research and things like that. But as you say, engagement means a whole host of different things, doesn't it?
Yeah, I definitely couldn't agree more with that. And for us, it's definitely a very multifaceted thing. And it's not that unusual for a policy organisation to have a sort of policy and research team over there and a communications and public affairs team on the other side of the desks. And I think for us, what's always been very important is to take that more integrated approach, because ultimately you can have the best evidence base to support your policy recommendation in the world. But if it doesn't have the support and the backing of those who are actually going to be delivering it and moving it forward, it's very unlikely to get traction, and it's very unlikely to be successful. So we do view engagement as very essential to what we do, but we also recognize it has a lot of different functions, a lot of different manifestations, and we treat it accordingly.
Yeah. Well, definitely. I can see that with getting, I mean, even just those of us who are very much on the outside, like I am, in terms of government and policy and things like that, it does seem to take, you need so much buy-in. It can take such a long time, all these partners and people that have to come together to actually make things happen in the policy world. And so I can see why having that network is so important, and having all those people connected and engaged and having those conversations. Yeah, so maybe you could tell us a bit about some of the things you worked on. I mean, certainly one example is that we were meant to record this conversation a week ago, but we had to delay it because of an urgent contribution to the UK, what was it, the industrial strategy. So, I mean, that sounds pretty high level stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a really interesting time for anyone who's working in and around policy, because there's a time when the government are making quite a lot of, they've set out their stall, they have 5 clear missions, and now they're developing the delivery plans and the changes that they feel need to be made in order to move forward on those 5 missions. And of course, the principal one is economic growth, and universities and businesses working together have an absolutely fundamental role to play in achieving that mission. And I think the government have been quite clear that they view the industrial strategy as quite an important mechanism in order to get us there. But the industrial strategy team have only got, I think, until April to develop some clear recommendations to really shift the dial on the UK's industrial policy and how it's going to drive us towards greater economic growth, which is a very short turnaround time. So as an organisation, we have been doing obviously work over a much longer period of time to develop recommendations that we think can make a big difference. And some of the areas that we've focused on, for example, are around private R&D investment in the UK. So the particular cause of our delay last week was that. So we have been recognising that obviously over a number of years, we've seen record levels of public investment in research going into the system. I know that for a raft of reasons, it might not always feel like that on the ground because of the research funding deficits that we also face in the UK. But unfortunately, as public investment has grown, private investment hasn't grown. Actually, it's declined a little over the last 2 years, which is quite a puzzling picture when we know that generally public investment leverages private investment, and that doesn't seem to have immediately happened in this case. So we've been working for the last 8 months or so on a piece of work which is led by Sir John Manzoni, but it also involves Nancy Rothwell, who's the deputy chair of the Industrial Strategy Council. And she's, of course, also the former Vice Chancellor of Manchester University, to really try and understand what the cause of this is, but also importantly, what we can do about it. Mm-hmm. And recognising, of course, that universities and their strength in research is a really critical part of that. So for us, there's a not really linear process of working quite closely with universities, with businesses to try and understand a problem like this and to try and work out what some practical solutions might be. But then also working quite closely with the Industrial Strategy Council, with government and government departments to also ensure that what we recommend goes with some of the grain. Because if we just throw something out there that doesn't sort of align with the priorities or the shared priorities of all of those stakeholders, all that triangle of government, business and universities, it's not going to be successful. So that's where the engagement question you asked earlier really comes in, because getting that engagement right is fundamental to success.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think it's a really nice example of how important it is to get all these things aligned. And as you say, making a recommendation that sort of fits with priorities and things like that as well. Because I know that for a lot of people, a lot of research projects have this vague sort of intention of, we want to talk to policymakers, or we want to do something that influences policy. And it sounds like a really good thing to do in terms of impact, but actually in reality, that can be a very challenging process almost. I mean, certainly from the things I've been involved with, challenging in terms of, as you say, finding that alignment of what you do with the current priorities, but also challenging sometimes as well with finding the right people to talk to and, getting into the right kind of conversations. That can be challenging as well. So yeah, all of the work that you're doing, I can see is really important to help to pull all of that together.
And I think sometimes there is a misconception that universities quite slow to change, but I think then in many ways they're not. And they've shown in the last few years that they're very adaptable and developing very quickly. And I'd say that one of the areas that I've really noticed changing is that there's a lot more investment into sort of centralized support to universities that are, or academic activity that's about influencing public policy. There's quite a lot of coordinated efforts between universities to create support mechanisms to help academics to see that route to impact. And actually, the government's helped itself a bit in this space as well, because a number of government departments have started to publish their own research priorities, which is helpful. It means that we're not all collectively guessing what they might want. They're actually telling us what research they would like to see to help guide their decisions. So I'd say that those are two quite positive bits of progress. But then the other side to that, of course, is that there are also challenges within the university sector that make it more difficult in some ways to take a strategic, considered longer term view of the collective impact that the university and all of the people who work within the university, what they're all kind of pulling towards, because things are quite tight and challenging for the sector at the moment.
Yeah. Oh, that's really useful to know that the government is publishing some kind of direction and research and things they would like to be done, because that's new information to me. So maybe if there's any links or anything to that, we could get them and put them in the show notes. But yeah, as you say, that long-term piece just always seems to be a challenge, whether it's government, whether it's universities. Governments work on these 4-year cycles, don't they? Where they've got to, or even less than that. Like you say, you've got a new government comes in, they've got to show they're making a difference very quickly to keep the public support, and universities as well. Having that sense of a long-term vision can be challenging, particularly in the current financial situation. Yeah.
And actually, I just mentioned the work that we've done on private R&D investment, and that's such a strong message that we get back from industries, is that they want to see greater consistency, so that they know what the priorities are that their investments are being sought for. But also the UK has had a bit of a tendency of spreading itself quite thinly across lots of different areas of economic priority. And I think the industrial strategy is a very good vehicle, perhaps for us all to get more collective sense of what the plan is for reversing some of the economic stagnation that we've seen in the UK, and how we can really drive that forward collectively and get behind it collectively as well. So I think it's a really important point.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Oh, well, you've certainly very clearly explained to us where the work you do sits and why it's important. And how did you get into doing this sort of thing? What's been your career journey?
So I'd say I'm probably quite a rare example of someone who always sort of knew what I wanted to do. I grew up in a very academic household. My dad was a computational physicist. We actually moved to Holland when I was 6 weeks old, because my dad wanted to work with the top computational physicist at the time, who happened to be Dutch. So kind of growing up, I grew up in that environment. And I think being in another country also opens your eyes to how decisions that are made by governments actually do really matter to the experience that you have and the opportunities that you have. And I experienced in Holland a very different education system than we have here. I think in Holland at the time, I assume this might still be the case now, around 1 in 5 people went to university, which is obviously quite different to the system that we have here today,
different,
where that kind of expansion has been so important. So I think from my perspective, when I was choosing my career, like education pathways and choosing what I would want to do next, I always had in my mind that I wanted to influence public policy, because I felt that was the best immediate impact I could make. and that driving positive and good government decisions was a really good thing to dedicate your career to. So I first worked at Universities UK, which is the representative body for universities for the UK, of course.
So losing the name, yeah.
Exactly. So I worked on a whole range of different issues while I was there and got a lot of exposure. I was actually given a huge amount of freedom to really consider what the key issues were for universities, work with universities to identify those, and work across a whole kind of breadth of different areas, which really exposed my understanding of different things that the university sector was grappling with. And I then worked at the University of Bedfordshire as their director of policy, which was a sort of two-sided role. One side, of course, was influencing the external landscape from the perspective of a teaching intensive institution. But the other side was also understanding how changes were affecting the institution and how strategically we should respond. And it was the kind of post-Brexit auger review sort of period of policy. So there was a lot of change the institution was grappling with, including things like the OFS registration. There was a lot happening. And of course, now I'm at NCUB, but I think what's been the sort of golden thread that's ran through those roles has always been, for me, what I've always been interested in is the impact that universities can have externally on economic growth, on society, and how you design an effective policy framework that helps maximise that impact.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, as you say, not only are universities really important to the UK, but also to the local communities and things that they're based on. And, as you say, the economic impact and the influence that as like an anchor institution, the influence that they can have, just the decisions they make, what it matters to the local community where they are. So, yes. Oh, well, so a fairly straightforward career journey then, definitely compared to some people that I've had on the podcast. So, yeah. So along that career journey, I'm sure you've done a couple of things that you're really proud of. Do you want to tell us about some examples?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm doing quite a lot of work at the moment, also with other organisations, on sort of how you really grasp policy impact and assess policy impact. And I think one of the challenges a lot of organisations have is that they often use sort of, have we influenced a policy decision as their final assessment of their impact, when actually what you really care about is, if I impacted that decision, what ultimately did that decision lead to, and has it been positive? So I think from my perspective, there are lots of things that we've influenced and done that I'm really proud of, but I think a couple that I'd really highlight. I think one for me was that during the Auger review, which feels like it was a long time ago, but of course it's still very much echoing in the shadows of current policy thinking. So that was a big review of post-16 education and funding. I think at the start of that review, there was quite a strong view of that the diversity of the university sector was potentially holding aspects of the sector back, or might not be sustainable as a kind of funding model going forward. And when I was at the University of Bedfordshire, I did a lot of work actually with the student union to understand what they needed and wanted from the review. And I think that really helped to emphasize just how important the diversity and social mobility in the sector has been to the way that the sector has effectiveness. And by working in partnership with the student union, even though we had different views on certain things like tuition fees, I think we were able to put together a really influential response to that review, and work really closely with those on the panel to really influence their views on what a diverse higher education system looks like in practice, and all the positive things that it drives and contributes to. So that's something I'm very proud of, and I think has we still see today in the policy movement as well. But there are other things, I think, in particular in relation to research. NCUB, alongside lots of other organisations, has been really at the forefront of calling for that growth in research funding. And I think that has been a very significant part of the funding and policy landscape over the last few years. Is I think governments across different political parties have recognised that research and innovation is critical to the UK's competitiveness and to its growth. And I think, I definitely attribute a lot of the work that my team and NCUB has done to some of that narrative. And also the recognition that within that picture, private R&D really matters too. So I think for me, there are definitely some examples of particular policy changes that work that I've done has contributed to. But I think I think some of my proudest achievements are actually more about where we've achieved a change in perspective, because that has a very enduring impact.
Yeah. And as you say, this is the thing that, you always knew you wanted to do something that made a difference. So being able to look and think, those are the things that have made a difference, even if maybe to the outside world, they're not the things that, it's not like you've changed a law or something, but like you say, even just changing perspective on something can actually in reality make a really big difference. Yeah.
I think it creates the space for others to think with you. Because when you've got a more favourable policy environment where there's recognition that actually, we need to take seriously this issue of private R&D investment. We need to be developing solutions to the decline that we're seeing. We need to be making ourselves a more competitive destination. I think what you're doing by changing the perspective and making policymakers think in that way is you create a forum for your own ideas to be heard, but also for others to be thinking about what contributions and thoughts and reflections and solutions that they might. And sometimes those solutions come from the most unexpected places, which is why I'm more than happy to add a link to the research interests from government to the podcast, because it might be that some of your listeners will have reflections and thoughts in some of those areas that could be really impactful and make a real difference.
Yeah, that's it. And sometimes bringing those ideas from a really diverse range of different places can make a massive difference. But I love your turn of phrase there when you said it gives those opportunities to think with people. And I think that's a really nice way of framing it. Yeah. Oh, I'm sure, though, that this hasn't at times been without its challenges. So what are some of the hurdles you've had to overcome throughout your career?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there have been plenty. I think many people will recognise that over the last few years, we've had a lot of turbulence in political leadership. So that has at times meant that things that we have been working on and gaining good traction on has very suddenly stopped because there's been a change in leadership, and therefore either a change in priority or a need to rebadge something as the new administrations. So that can be quite challenging to navigate. And sometimes you actually look back at something you maybe worked on 5 years ago and think, oh, that's gone with the grain again. We can use that again. But the grain has changed a lot in the last few years, and that's been difficult. I think the other aspect of it that's often difficult is that it hasn't been the easiest environment in terms of recognition of just how important that role of universities in the UK is. When we talk to businesses, they almost always tell us that the university sector is probably the UK's strongest strategic asset, that when you're a UK country director and you're pitching for investment in the UK to your headquarters in another country, it doesn't take long for you to get to the university system as one of the main reasons for that investment. And yet I don't think that has properly and fully been heard by a general public and by policymakers. And I think one of the issues, and I've reflected on this quite a lot, I think one of the problems is that because universities are so embedded and there are so many multifaceted impacts that they make, that when we tell the story of our impact, there are a lot of ands. It's we do this and we do that. We produce the graduates and we do research application and we do consultancy and we do just the local regeneration. We provide that anchor role as an institution. So there is just so many ands that I think we get a little bit lost in the detail. So I think we need to sharpen up our story so that we can continue to play that impactful role when we're recognised for it.
Yeah, I think that really makes a lot of sense to me, actually. Yeah, because it is, universities just touch so many parts of life that it isn't always a very kind of coherent story about what difference they make. And increasingly, in this very kind of brand messaging driven world that we're in, and people are so influenced by that sort of stuff, that if you can't get to the point quickly, then sometimes that message gets completely lost, doesn't it? Yeah. Oh, but I also completely resonate with you saying that things come in and out of fashion. I've been doing the kind of work I do for long enough to have seen. It's like things come round about every 5 years, and then it's like, oh, we're doing that again, are we? Okay,
yeah. I've assessed that I think the shelf life tends to be around 3 years for big sector initiatives. So we had something like the efficiency exchange. I mean, that's about 10 years ago now, but that had about 3 years. There was the big civic universities focus. That had about 3 years. There's definitely things that come and go, but that doesn't mean that when they go,
they've gone forever. Yes, I think that's worth knowing. Anybody who's quite new to this world, things will come round. Yes, things will come back round again. Fantastic. Well, my last question for you is one that I ask all my guests, which is, if you had a magic wand, what would you change about the little corner of the research adjacent world that you work in?
Well, I find this one so difficult to answer, Sarah, because the magic wand sort of implies that it requires, it's not something that we can drive. And I've struggled to think of anything that we can't drive. I think, everything is within our gift. So, well, I guess the thing that I would most like to see changed is that I think sometimes we view something like knowledge exchange as quite an abstract kind of concept, when actually it's something that's people. It's people moving between different careers, people sharing their ideas, expanding their ideas through networking and co-creation. And I'd like to see much more sort of investment and support for people to be able to move freely between different sectors, think freely between different ideas. And I know that sounds a bit abstract, but I think we somehow seem to kind of self-impose some boundaries. And some of that I think is self-imposed, and some of it's kind of around institutional policy or framing, and it's a wicked problem. So if we can see the human side of this more and engage with the human side more, I think we'd succeed better.
Yeah, I think you're not the first person to have said they want to use their magic wand to break down some of these silos. And as you say, so many of these problems we're facing at the moment need lots of different disciplines to work together. They need like universities and researchers and policymakers and people like us to work together and find those solutions. And at the moment, we're almost, we forget that it's about people and we think it's like some sort of abstract thing, when really it's about people talking to people and sharing ideas and getting things done. So yeah, that is lovely. And yes, I always think of the magic wand as being, it's not so much that it's magical, but it's more that it takes down the barriers of money and time and, things like that, get things happening a bit quicker. So yes, fantastic. Oh, well, to wrap up our conversation then, if anybody would like to get in touch with you or find out more about the work that you do, whereabouts would you send them?
Yeah, well, we have a fabulous website. So that's ncub.co.uk. And really, there's a lot of material on there that includes all of the policy and evidence reports that we do, a lot of overviews of the types of projects that we have running. But importantly, it also includes a lot of showcasing of university business collaborations and what they're achieving and doing in practice. So that's a great place to start. We also have a newsletter. We have a monthly newsletter that anybody can access, as well as a weekly newsletter for our members. And, other than that, I think we're a very accessible team. So if anyone would want to reach out to us, there's different ways of doing that, and the kind of contact details for that are on our webpage. So we're always welcoming reflections and thoughts.
And we'll get the links and put them in the show notes. And do you do LinkedIn or Blue Sky or anything like that? Or
oh, it's a bit fluid at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I know.
So I definitely do LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And the organisation does LinkedIn as well. Yeah. So you can definitely follow us on there. Excellent. We have at the moment only got an X account, but we are on the verge of converting to Blue Sky as well. So do follow us on that as too.
Yes, it is all a bit kind of in the middle, messy middle at the moment in that respect, isn't it? Yes. Oh, well, thank you so much, Rosalind, for coming along and telling us about your story. It's been really interesting. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks for listening to Research Adjacent. If you're listening in a podcast app, please check you're subscribed and then use the links in the episode description to find full show notes and to follow the podcast on LinkedIn or Instagram. You can also find all the links and other episodes at www.researchadjacent.com. Research Adjacent is presented and produced by Sarah McCluskey, and the theme music is by Lemon Music Studios on Pixabay. And you, yes you, get a big gold star for listening right to the end. See you next time.